Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. I'm Jean McCormick, and I have the honor of being the president of the Institute. This is our first public program of the fall, and we're incredibly excited to kick off a busy season by partnering with WGBH to convene a distinguished panel of experts to discuss this important topic. You know, when Senator Kennedy conceived of the Institute, he envisioned a place where visitors would learn about the important role of the U.S. Senate. But more important, he wanted them to be able to actually experience democracy. And he wanted the Institute to be a center for civic engagement, a place that would, as a result of your visiting here, inspire visitors to take a proactive and a meaningful role in their own communities. What does that mean? Obviously, we want people to vote. It's the heart of a democracy. We don't tell you how to vote, but to vote. Certainly, we want you to be informed in that voting. And we want you to take initiative. Certainly ballot initiatives are just that, a way of the people speaking about an issue that's important to them. But I think Senator Kennedy's goal was that everyone would understand that you can make a difference in a big way and even in small ways. So I want to thank our panelists for being here. And of course, we're thrilled to welcome back Jim Braude from WGBH to moderate this discussion. It will make it lively, as always. As the host of WGBH TV's Greater Boston and co-host of Jim and Marjorie, he has been closely covering the evolution of the 4 ballot questions that will be facing voters this fall, and is an expert to guide us through the nuances surrounding the campaigns and the ideas behind the initiative. So thank you to Jim and the entire team from WGBH for working with us in this partnership. But before I turn the program over to Jim, I have the honor to introduce State Representative Jonathan Hecht of Watertown to speak about his work with Massachusetts Citizens Initiative Review Pilot Project. Representative Hecht has been serving the Commonwealth's 29th Middlesex District since 2008, and he recently has been leading the efforts of the review project to make ballot questions and the information surrounding them more accessible and understandable to Massachusetts voters. Representative Hecht and the pilot project aim to bring clarity to the often confusing ballot questions voters face in the election booth each year. And we're honored to have him here to talk about his efforts. So Representative Hecht, thank you for being with us, and please join me at the podium.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Dr. McCormick. I want to congratulate and thank the Edward M. Kennedy Institute and WGBH for bringing together this very impressive group of experts to talk about question 4. And I also want to thank them for the opportunity that they've given me to talk briefly here at the outset about an experiment that's currently underway in Massachusetts with an innovative approach to informing voters about ballot questions, and to invite you to learn more about it and to give your feedback. It's called Citizens Initiative Review, or CIR, and it's based on a model that's been in use in Oregon for a number of years and is now being tried in several other states. And let me explain to you how it works. A panel of 20 citizens, representative of the voting population as a whole, is brought together for 4 days of intensive deliberations on a ballot question. They hear from the campaigns pro and con, They pose questions to independent policy experts, and they deliberate among themselves, drawing on their own different backgrounds and viewpoints. With the help of trained facilitators, they ultimately produce a one-page, 250-word statement called a citizen's statement that summarizes what they feel to be the key facts that voters should understand about the ballot question, as well as the strongest and most credible arguments for and against. In essence, then, this is a voter education effort that is driven by voters themselves, working on behalf of their fellow voters, who ideally might want to dig into a ballot question, but don't have 4 days out of their busy lives to devote to it. Their citizen statement is different from the partisan positions presented by the campaigns. The statement doesn't take a position pro or con. It presents information on both sides that the citizen panelists believe other voters would want to have. It's also different from the official summary prepared by the Attorney General and contained in the Red Voter Guide that the Secretary of State sends to all voters. Coincidentally, that red guide arrived at my house today. Maybe it arrived at your house today as well. The citizen statement is short, as I said, 250 words. It is written in lay language, and it reflects the perspective of regular citizens, not government lawyers. We are currently doing a pilot of CIR in Massachusetts using question 4, the question we're going to be hearing about tonight, as the test case. This is a non-governmental project organized by my office, working together with the Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University and Healthy Democracy, the organization that pioneered CIR out in Oregon. The citizen panelists were drawn from a random sample of 10,000 Massachusetts voters, balanced to reflect the Massachusetts voting population in terms of age, gender, party affiliation, race and ethnicity, place of residence, and level of education. At the end of August, they came together in Watertown, of course, for 4 days of very hard work. We had excellent participation from both the campaigns for and against question 4. Senator Lewis, one of the panelists tonight, presented twice on behalf of the No campaign. In fact, he jumped off a plane from overseas and came straight over to talk to our citizen panelists, which we really appreciated. And Dr. Sabat also spoke for the No campaign. The citizen panelists also had an opportunity to pose questions to experts on drug use, medicine, brain science, public health, regulation of industries, and law enforcement. And also one of Mr. Friedman's colleagues from Colorado on the experience in that state since it legalized marijuana in 2012. And then they spent the better part of 2 days reflecting together and writing their citizen statement. It was really a remarkable and an inspiring thing to see. 20 people who had never met before, a 91-year-old great-grandmother from Springfield, alongside a 20-year-old college student from Brockton, working collaboratively and conscientiously to produce a statement containing what they felt their fellow voters would want to know about the varied and complicated issues related to marijuana legalization. Many of the citizen panelists afterwards described it as the most meaningful, empowering political experience of their lives. The citizen statement that they produced, the citizen statement on question 4, is available on the project website. And the website address is CIR, Citizens Initiative Review, CIRMass2016.org, CIRMass2016.org. An independent research team out of Penn State is holding focus groups this week to hear from voters whether they find it useful. I invite you to look at the statement on the website and to give your feedback too. In light of what we learn, we will consider filing legislation next year to institutionalize CIR in Massachusetts, as they have done in Oregon, where the citizen statement is included in the official voter guide. I want to close with a brief reflection on why I think the CIR experiment is important. We are in an era now in Massachusetts of very active use of ballot questions to make law. And from a historical perspective, this is a very striking development. There are 4 questions, as you know, on the statewide ballot this year. And this marks the 12th time in the last 16 biennial state elections, dating back to 1986, that there have been at least 3 questions on the ballot. By way of contrast, for the first 65 years that Massachusetts had a process for making laws via the ballot, what's known as the initiative petition system, there were only 3 elections out of 32, 3 out of 32 over those 65 years, when voters faced 3 or more initiative petitions. Now, perhaps WGBH and the EMK Institute could convene another program to discuss why this has happened. For now, we can just note that this is the era that we are living in, an era in which the idea of direct democracy, which inspired Massachusetts back in 1918 to make the initiative petition system part of its constitution, is now being put into action with increasing frequency, and with respect to such momentous matters as assisted suicide, paid sick leave, casinos, farm animal confinement, charter schools, and, of course, marijuana. As the title of this forum tonight puts it, these are now matters for the citizen's choice. Given that, I believe it's very important and very appropriate to be thinking about how we can amplify the citizen's voice in the information that is presented to voters as they make these vital decisions about the future of our state. And that is what the CIR is all about. So I thank you again, Dr. McCormick, for the opportunity to talk about the Citizens Initiative Review Pilot Project. And please, again, go to the website. I feel like the presidential candidates at this point. There should be something down here that has the website showing. CIRmass2016.org. I'm not asking for you to contribute money, just asking for you to take a look at the citizen statement and contribute your feedback. Thank you very much.
Eventually, a little lost.
Good evening, everyone. I am Jim Browdy. By the way, that's an applause line. I am Jim Browdy. Thank you. We do that. Thank you. Those are my people. And we're here to discuss whether marijuana should be legalized. I just heard the representative say that one of the participants in the CIR said it was the most meaningful and empowering political experience of their life. This will not be the most meaningful and empowering political experience of your life, but hopefully you'll learn something and go home with a greater understanding of what's at stake on November 8th. I'm going to do about a minute's worth of background for people who aren't aware of what the history has been in this country, where we currently are. I'll introduce the panelists, and then we'll get started. Most of you know this. 4 states have already legalized marijuana: Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and Colorado, and of course the District of Columbia. 2 of those states are represented here. On November 8th, Massachusetts will not be alone. There'll be 4 other states voting on the issue as well, including California and Maine. Ours would, I'm giving you the short version, legalize marijuana for people at least 21 years old, apply an excise tax of 3.75% on top of the state sales tax. A little bit of history, because it's rich in this state. In 2008 and 2012, we voted on marijuana-related questions. Decriminalization in 2008, 2012 was medical marijuana. You probably remember 2 things were very similar in both campaigns. Public officials were overwhelmingly opposed to both, and the public overwhelmingly embraced both questions in the 60% plus range. This year, some things are similar, some are different. Most public officials, not all, are still opposed to the question, but if you see recent polls, this marijuana question, legalization, is neck and neck in the polls, and the assumption is it's going to stay that way as we approach the last 48 days. Tonight you'll have proponents, opponents, and I think one agnostic. You're supposed to pretend like you're agnostic anyway. You'll understand why in a minute. There are no rules except we have so much to cover in, 75 minutes. No filibusters. Brevity is the coin of the realm. If you can't control yourself and you got to say something, just say it. That is perfectly fine. And in an effort to speed this along, in the spirit of Matt Lauer, I promise you I will ask no important follow-up questions to any of the panelists. So that should help us move. Kevin applauded that thing. What I'm doing here, and I'm almost done, I'm just going to run down the list of the most powerful arguments for and against that we've heard. I've incorporated many of your questions that you submitted, hundreds of questions actually. They're integrated into what we are doing tonight. Now, before we start, just to get a lay of the land, how many people in this room, and no lying, how many people in this room have ever smoked marijuana? I would say, you don't have to applaud, I just said how many, maybe 70%, 75%. How many people before they've heard this panel, and obviously the next 48 days, how many people as of tonight intend to vote yes on this question? I'd say that's a majority. You can see the hand that is the highest is my radio co-host, Marjorie Egan from Boston Public Radio. She's not hiding anything. Hi, Marjorie. It's nice to see you. How many people plan to vote no? I'd say maybe a little less than a third, a quarter, maybe a little bit less than that. And how many people, honestly, not one of these Frank Luntz focus groups where you lie and say you're uncommitted so you can stay on television for the whole campaign, how many people are really uncommitted as of tonight? That's, I don't know, maybe a sixth, a seventh, something like that. Okay, so we get a sense of where we are, and we may visit that later in the night and see if you've changed your position. Let me introduce these people. Known as the marijuana czar. Doesn't get much better than that, does it?
My law school friends are very generous.
Andrew Friedman is Colorado's first director of marijuana coordination, which Colorado, legalized recreational marijuana in 2014. Went to school here, Tufts and Harvard Law School, moved back to Colorado. He joined John Hickenlooper's campaign for governor, has worked for the administration since. Dr. Kevin Hill, on the end, is an addiction psychiatrist, director of the Substance Abuse Consultation Service at the Great McLean Hospital, and assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He's the author of Marijuana, the Unbiased Truth About the World's Most Popular Weed. State Senator Jason Lewis, he would be there, standing next to Dr. Hill. He's a Democrat from Winchester, chair of the Joint Committee on Public Health of the legislature. He also chairs the 9-member Senate Special Committee on Marijuana, which, by the way, was a 1-member committee for a long period of time, which maybe you can explain later. They traveled to Colorado this past January to investigate the impact of the legislation there and published their findings back in March. He'll describe them. Madeline Martinez opened the country's first cannabis cafe in 2009 in Portland, Oregon. And it's a gathering place for the medical marijuana community. Obviously, Oregon was also, obviously the first state to decriminalize marijuana. She is also the executive director of the Oregon chapter of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. It's called NORML, and it advocates for legalization around the country. Dr. Kevin Sabet is an assistant professor of psychiatry, director of the Drug Policy Institute at the University of Florida. In 2013, he and former Rhode Island Congressman Patrick Kennedy founded the anti-legalization organization. It's called SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. He has served as a senior advisor to the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, worked for 3 presidents, Obama, Clinton, and Bush, correct? Did I get them right? Okay. And has authored the book Reefer Sanity, not my favorite movie, by the way, Reefer Sanity, 7 Great Myths About Marijuana. So that's it, that's the setup, that's the context. Here are your panelists. Let's get started. I'm going to just go down the line, 30 to 45 seconds each, and I really mean 30 to 45 seconds, where you are on the whole legalization question, and just cite the one major reason that you hold the position you do, even if there are a multitude of reasons you're there. Let's start with you, Kevin Sabet.
Thanks, Jim. Well, thanks for everyone for coming. I think it's incredible. Here we are at the Edward Kennedy Institute, and I want to thank them for putting this on. Named after a senator who was fighting big tobacco for decades. And Patrick and I had this conversation, how interesting it was that we were going to be discussing what essentially is the next big tobacco. And this was big tobacco, of course, was a industry that lied to the American people for a century, that said tobacco wasn't addictive, it didn't cause harm, it didn't cause lung cancer, all the while just simply trying to profit off of other people's addiction. This is no different with marijuana. I don't really care if you're an adult in Massachusetts and you want to smoke marijuana in the privacy of your own home. This is about the commercialization. This is about pot candies targeting kids, advertisements. This is about money, not marijuana, and this is why I'm opposed to it.
Fair enough. Madeline, you're next.
I'm a proponent for marijuana. I'm on the national...
Kevin's a no, by the way, if it wasn't clear from that statement. I'm sorry. Sorry, Madeline.
I'm on the board of National NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and the NORML's Women's Alliance. And I am encouraged by what's going on across the country with all these initiatives that are coming out. And I believe in personal privacy. And I'm really saddened to see how much we've ruined and just ruined people's lives by sending them to prison for marijuana. No one's ever died of a lethal dose of marijuana. And I believe that as myself, I'm a good citizen. I pay my taxes, I go on with life, and all I want to do is be able to live the way I want, privately, and I don't believe that there's any harm in marijuana. I believe that it's a useful part of life. For me, it is.
Marijuana czar.
Yep.
He does have a name, Andrew Friedman. Andrew, go ahead.
Well, I'm here mainly, the way I got this job is that I am actually a marijuana agnostic. Not because I didn't have an opinion one way or the other, I didn't think to weigh in those ways. I cared about early childhood education. When the governor's chief of staff pushed me to take this job, she told me, it's one of the places in the world where good government matters. And the reason I like to come to forums like this, which I think is a wonderful experience, is I think you're going to hear a lot of pro and con, anti-pro debate going on that you probably have heard before. And I think what's really important is to realize how this happened matters just as much as if it happens. And so thinking through why it is that you care about marijuana legalization, what sort of metrics are going to be your standards for success, and what are you going to do if things go right or wrong? How are you going to change as a state in order to accommodate those things? And those are the things I hope to help you think through.
What's your great line? We're making the plane as we're flying it. Is that the line?
I wish I had said we're building the plane as we're flying
Whatever.
it, but yes.
It's a great line, nevertheless. Senator Lewis.
Thank you, Jim, and I want to also thank the EMK Institute and WGBH for bringing us together. I know that many people are open to the legalization of marijuana for recreational use. I went to Colorado. I spent a year studying this issue. I know pot is here to stay. But what we are voting on in November is not the concept of legalization. It is a very specific 24-page ballot question, and I believe it goes too far, too fast for Massachusetts, because fundamentally what it does is it introduces the commercial billion-dollar marijuana industry into Massachusetts. It's an industry that we've seen in Colorado and elsewhere puts their own profits ahead of the health and safety of our kids and our communities. That's because they're pushing high-potency edibles like candy, gummy bears, cookies that are particularly appealing to kids. They have no solution for drugged driving, which is a growing problem. In fact, it doubled in Washington. And they're also, in this particular ballot question, tying the hands of our cities and towns so that there will be pot shops in virtually every community across our state. It's the wrong thing for Massachusetts.
I wasn't going to ask a follow-up question here, but let me just do it very quickly. You said it's not an abstract notion. It's this question we're voting on here, and obviously some of you people are not going to be voting. If you could draft the question for legalization, could you imagine supporting it?
Absolutely.
You could.
I could draft a question that does not commercialize the product.
That legalizes
that
marijuana.
would legalize it without commercialization. In other words, there's no profit motive to be made selling it, but you have a product that's safe and labeled and legal, so you protect public health and safety. That's the key. That's the way we should be handling this.
Are you nodding your head in agreement there, too?
You could.
I'm going to get to you.
You've already decriminalized in Massachusetts. Adults aren't going to prison already. They can already use without fearing criminal penalties. You could imagine maybe reforming that a little bit more. That's so different than the idea of pot advertising of marijuana stores.
Dr. Hill.
So I'm just trying to stick to the science and the evidence in an effort to try to bridge
That's
the gap.
so old school.
Try to bridge the gap between what the science is and what public perception for the benefit of the voters. Like, as people have talked about, I think conceptually, legalization is fine. I think the ballot initiative has a few weaknesses. But I think one thing that we really haven't done in this state and around the country is really think more about sensible policy. So what should happen if this gets voted? I think people should be able to have what they want if we can limit the risk.
By the way, he did a terrific piece in the Globe yesterday. If you didn't see it, Google it. It's the best I've seen graphic of the primary issues, the pros and the cons, and where he thinks the truth lies. It was really terrific. Let's start with some of the arguments. I want to start with you because we've interviewed you a couple times. Marjorie and I have been on my television show. You talk a lot about the impact on kids, and I have to say, of the opponents, that's the argument I've heard the most. It's fine if the law says you got to be at least 21. Let's deal with the real world. it's going to be more accessible, all these kinds of things. What's your major concern about the impact on under 21-year-olds, on children? Make the case, please, Senator.
The case is simply that if you legalize it and commercialize it, and you have businesses that are pushing pot edibles that are very enticing, you're pushing advertising on TV, radio, billboards, all over social media, celebrity sponsorships. You have pot shops springing up all across our state and people growing tens of thousands of dollars in their homes. What that says to our teens and young adults is there's no risk in using marijuana, so the perception of harm goes down. It also makes it more available and more accessible, not less, because the black market, by the way, doesn't go away. It's still thriving in Colorado. And it also will bring down the price as well, because that's what will happen when you get scale economies, making it even cheaper for kids and teens to access.
What's the Colorado been?
Common sense tells us teen use will go up.
What's the Colorado experience been with teen use?
Well, so far in our statistics, teen use has not gone up.
Has not gone up.
Has not gone up. And that's our big survey, about 17,000 kids. And even if you want to use the NISDA data, which is not as good as the Healthy Kids Colorado data, there's no statistical significantly change since legalization. Now, that's not supposed to show up in 2 years. I think that people who are, if you're a 13-year-old and you were an 11-year-old when legalization happened, you still have all of the mores, all of the social constructs, the same parenting that you had before that moment. I'm more interested in what the 2-year-old looks like when he's 15 than what the 11-year-old looks like when they're 13. But the good news is, I think we were fearful of a big spike in teen use. But consumption in general, we just have not seen more smokers of marijuana, youth, adults. Actually, the only statistically significant increase have been 65 years and plus for marijuana.
Do you hear that?
And in Oregon,
Kevin Sabat had his hand up first. Kevin, and then we'll get to you, Madeline. Yes.
Colorado's now the #1 state in the country. It never was for youth marijuana
That's
use.
not true. 2009, in the same data, it was number one.
The NISDA data since legalization, Colorado is now #1. And the only state survey which you all did, and I commended you for trying to do it, but it was, you left out some of the biggest school districts. You also left out kids that had dropped out of school and weren't in school. Look, at the end of the day, Jim, and I brought some props if that's okay, I think parents should ask themselves whether they can tell which bag of candy here is marijuana and which one isn't.
You're not going to do a Skittles thing.
Well, you can try them if you want, Jim, but maybe afterwards. If you can't tell, which you probably can't, I bet you your kid can't tell either. When these things are lying around, the reason the emergency room admissions in Colorado for kids under 5, and I don't think Andrew would dispute this, has gone up significantly, doubled, is because these kinds of things are lying around. They're marketed. Of course they're marketed to young people, and young people are ingesting them. They are essentially, again, one of them is real, one of them isn't. They are the real candy here, simply sprayed with THC. And there's no way to tell the difference. And that's what Massachusetts voters are voting on. I don't care if an adult wants to smoke marijuana. They shouldn't go to prison for it either. But do you really want to legalize these? I'm not even sure NORML wants to do that. I mean, this is for people who want to make a ton of money in Massachusetts. They don't make it by selling joints to baby boomers or 65 and older. I hate to break it to you. They make it by making these candies and making them available to young people.
You were shaking your head, disagreeing with some of the facts that Kevin Sabat was putting on the table.
I mean, some of the facts are true. Listen, the youth consumption data is it's a question still in progress, but the truth is that there is not a statistically significant difference between before legalization and now. And I think people get so tired of facts when we exaggerate them. Nobody was arguing that Healthy Kids Colorado wasn't the best survey in Colorado before it came out. The second it came out, there was suddenly a whole bunch of arguments.
Madeline, a minute ago, Kevin Sabat said even NORML, your organization, wouldn't want that sort of stuff marketed. Is he speaking for you?
well, I think that if it's well packaged and carefully, and people are responsible, that it's not a problem. I haven't seen any increase in Oregon, and teen use is down in Oregon.
Just started. But in Andrew, didn't the emergency room admissions go up for?
We had about 20 emergency room admissions from the ingestion of edibles, and listen, it looks like gummy bears. Now, starting in October, it won't be gummy bears. That's a very specific thing that we've started to regulate away from. But edibles are an attractive thing for kids, and there's not going to be a way around that.
Dr. Kevin Hill, if you want to speak to this, it's fine, but I want to continue or advance the kid discussion here. Sure. The other argument we hear a lot from the critics of this is that brain development for a kid is more susceptible to problems when marijuana, even if harmless for an adult, not harmless for a kid? You're the science guy. Where's the science?
It's absolutely true. I think for that group, you're talking 25 and below, so believe it or not, your brain develops into your mid-20s, so for some of us, it's over. But if you're in that group, certainly regular marijuana use, so it matters how much you use. As I like to say, the dose matters. But if you're using marijuana regularly at a young age, there are a host of problems. Cognitive difficulties, you can have IQ decline, worsening anxiety, worsening depression. So again, if states are considering this type of policy, you need to think about how you can protect that group, absolutely.
By the way, there's one of the things in the summary, I'm assuming most people here know, a commission would be created, not unlike the alcohol and what's it called? The Alcohol and Beverage Commission in Massachusetts that would oversee implementation here. You know,
That's who's on that commission.
Yeah.
well,
Who's appointed to that commission
that's
is
an
the
open-
marijuana industry itself, because this has been written by the pot industry.
I want to get to the commercialization issue in a minute. One of the primary things you've seen in the ballot question, it says regulate marijuana like alcohol. Does anybody here think that marijuana is more harmful than alcohol to the population?
Oh, I think it's much safer than alcohol to
Does
our
anybody
population.
think it's more harmful?
Well, it depends on,
you?
I do on certain you know, outcomes. So you can't just say, you know, because the issue is like, is tobacco more harmful than heroin? Well, tobacco is actually more addictive than heroin. Now, you wouldn't say, though, necessarily that overall it would be more harmful for
the general
other
population,
issues.
the question
They're
is,
different.
Is marijuana, so your question
I think they're
is it
different, and in
depends.
many ways, marijuana is more harmful when you look at brain development for learning and cognition. Alcohol in and out of your system in a day. Marijuana stays in your system much longer. It can affect you for longer, and that is vulnerable. The adolescent brain is vulnerable to
Is
that.
marijuana more harmful than alcohol?
No, absolutely not. And I mean, I think that type of argument is a problem, right? Because
Could you move your mic up, if you don't
Sure.
mind, Kevin, a little bit, just a little higher?
Sure. So, you know, as I like to talk about, I mean, there are different degrees.
That's good. That's good. Just turn it to your. That's
Different
fine.
degrees of danger. So I like to think about a continuum: marijuana, alcohol, opioids. Obviously, opioids are killers. They're ravaging the Commonwealth and really the country. So there definitely are problems associated with marijuana, but not on the same scale.
Is it more harmful than
I
alcohol?
don't think that's the right question.
Why
to
isn't
ask.
it?
Be-
Yeah.
Because
Alcohol's legal.
we're not debating whether we are going to pass a ballot question to legalize alcohol.
Why
Alcohol
shouldn't we?
is,
Wait a
is
minute.
legal.
If you don't
it's
believe,
not,
Senator,
it's not
if
going
you don't
away.
believe, and I didn't hear what your answer was, if you don't believe that marijuana is more harmful than alcohol, then why are you not moving to
No, I
ban
agree.
alcohol?
I agree with Dr. Sabat. You know, obviously, marijuana doesn't kill you with an overdose the way alcohol does. It doesn't cause the same degree of violence. But there are many serious harms that marijuana causes, as Dr. Hill said, for our young people. And what we are debating and what the voters are voting on is whether we increase access and commercialize marijuana, not alcohol. So we should stay focused, I believe, on the question of marijuana and not alcohol. It's a red herring to make this about alcohol.
Alcohol has a long history of widespread accepted use by the majority of the Western population for the last 4,000 years. If we were talking about marijuana having 70% adults using for thousands of years, then we'd have to we'd have to be talking about regulation.
Well, you know, we are talking about, Kevin,
but the
we are
experience
talking
of
about a
alcohol has been a
majority-
disaster. The public health experience, the marketing to young people, the special. I've worked for 3 presidents in different parties, Republican or Democrat. The revolving door of special interests for alcohol is a national disgrace. The taxes, the advertising, the targeting of college students.
same commercialization
So,
you're
so
talking
that's
about.
the issue with marijuana. We're in America. We're not in Finland or El Salvador
So
where they don't
fix-
have that history.
In English, you two particularly, fix the commercialization, then I want you to tell me, you two, whether this commercialization issue is a problem in your 2 states. Fix it in 15 seconds.
You would have low-level use being legal. You would maybe do a grow-your-own kind of thing. You would have a decriminalization the way Massachusetts has. But the problem is this initiative has been written by and for the pot industry to be able to advertise these edibles, these candies, to be able to have all of these, take away local control. In Colorado, they at least are able to opt out. 2/3 of the localities in Colorado have decided they don't want pot shops in their community. They don't mind home sort of decriminalization, but they've said, you know what, we just don't think it's good for our
The
community.
proponents have said, and I
Can I
don't
speak
know,
to that for a
one
second?
second, the proponents I've heard say, and I am a lawyer, but not much of one, but at least not as relates to this, they said the commission that's created would have the power to, for example, ban those edibles. If the edibles were banned, if that, you've mentioned the edibles several times, would that go a long
Why
way
are we
towards
speaking
allaying
in
your
abstract?
concerns?
Why are we speaking in abstract, Jim? This commission appoints 9 out of the 15 people get to be directly or indirectly from the pot industry. So yeah, great. Let's speak in abstract. If it took Colorado, I don't know how many years, Andrew. Finally, in October, like you said, they are banning the gummy bears. They're not banning the other candies, by the way. I don't think. But the commission in Massachusetts is going to be rigged from the start because those are the folks who is paying for this ballot initiative. Look at the board of directors of the largest private equity companies of marijuana based in Seattle, Silicon Valley, and Wall Street. They are writing what Massachusetts will be
Can I
voting.
talk to the 2 states that have a real experience? What is the commercialization issue, both that the senator and Kevin Sabet have mentioned? Has that been an issue in your states? First, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. So large-scale regulated companies can meet a lot of public health and safety standards that can't be met by home grows. I actually think home grows is probably the worst problem that we have in Colorado. That's where
Is the worst problem.
Yes, and the regulated industry is able to keep up with pesticide management, with tracking every marijuana plant from seed to sale. They have over 90% success rate with stings for under 21-year-olds. So there's a very good side to having a
But how
highly
many
regulated
recalls were
industry.
last year in Colorado?
On the other side, you know, at the point, one of the things we do worry about is the gearing up of actual commercialization and the gearing up of advertising. At the point where somebody finally has $15 million in the game to throw into advertising, we worry about what that's going to look like.
What are you going to do about it?
Well, we've crosswalked everything that exists in the tobacco laws that we're able to, that are legal for us to crosswalk onto marijuana. But the day is going to come where those will be big fights.
Commercialization been a big problem there?
No, it hasn't. Not in Oregon. We're still a very young legalization program, so no, it's not out there. Commercialized, it is in Colorado.
You know, since we've talked a lot in 10 minutes here about edibles, you're a legislator. This is a law if it passes. If you think edibles are the biggest problem, rather than relying on a commission that Kevin Sabet doesn't trust, why don't you say that you're going to sponsor an amendment the second this passes, which you have the power to do, which will ban edibles, removal edibles, regardless of what the public, and then you're putting the public on fair notice.
Jim, I wish I had that power, but
Well, you can
unfortunately,
say it.
I'm not the emperor. You know, I'm one of 200 lawmakers. We have a governor.
Would you file such an amendment if this thing passed?
I don't even want to go with the hypothetical because I am working hard to make sure that this does not become the law in November. The fact is, there's many
Senator,
problems in this
shouldn't you
ballot
prepare?
question.
We've had
Edibles,
this discussion before. It may become the law. One of the problems with the medical marijuana law is nobody in government prepared for this thing. The people spoke loudly, almost 2 to 1, and the state was totally unprepared to implement the popular will.
Let me assure you and others who are listening, we obviously have been working hard on this issue. That's why the state Senate formed a special Senate committee on marijuana 18 months ago. That's why we've been studying this issue. That's why you've seen our 118-page report laying out all the policy issues. So we've been doing a lot of thinking on this. And as a result of that work we've done and looking at Colorado, Oregon, and Washington is why I've come to the conclusion that this specific ballot question is the wrong question. What I think we should do is vote this down, and then let's go back to the drawing board and get this right.
Kevin Hill, one of the most opioids have been mentioned a couple of times. Depends on what day you read the paper. On some days, it's a gateway drug. On some days, even if it's not a gateway to another drug, you're going to become addicted to marijuana. And then you read the study, was it out of Columbia the other day, saying that access to medical marijuana has cut the use of opioids in those states that have passed that. Where does the truth lie here?
With gateway, well, I think when people talk about gateway, they think about a causal relationship. If you use marijuana at a young age, then this certainly will happen to you. That is not the case. But what we do see when people are using opioids, addicted to opioids, they've usually started to use marijuana or nicotine or alcohol at a young age there. In terms of the relationship between opioids and marijuana, there's absolutely a connection. We need to do more work on that. There's clearly
Connection meaning what?
Well, so there's a relationship there. You know, certain common pathways that both of these drugs of abuse use, and I think that speaks to why we've seen some of these papers come out. The one that you referred to, one a couple of years back, that showed in the medical marijuana states fewer opioid-related deaths. So, and clearly, if you talk to patients, they'll tell you that if they're prescribed powerful opioids and they start to use medical cannabis, they often will use fewer opioids. So there's something there. Absolutely.
Senator.
I just wanted to address that because I think it's very unfortunate and misleading that the proponents of this ballot question are trying to make this argument that we should have more access to marijuana that's going to solve our opioid epidemic. The fact is that we have a medical marijuana program, and we're working hard to make it more accessible and affordable to those who have a legitimate health reason. And right now, there is absolutely no medical consensus that marijuana is a solution to the opioid epidemic. And in fact, that's why the Mass Medical Society, the hospitals, addiction experts, and counselors have all come out publicly in opposition to this
By the way,
ballot
they
question.
didn't, the study, as I recall it, please correct me if I'm wrong, didn't say it was a solution. They said in those states that they studied that
The
had medical
proponents-
marijuana laws,
right.
it reduced
The-
opioid use,
I agree.
including prescription painkillers. They didn't say it was a solution.
The proponents of this ballot question have been making
see.
that argument. And there was a letter with, signed by 45 healthcare providers and parents who have lost children to an opioid overdose, a number of whom are with us in the audience tonight, who wrote to say that they were so upset that the campaign was arguing that marijuana is the solution to opioid overdoses. And the proponents responded to that by calling them props of the opposition campaign,
What do you
which
say
I
to
think
those
was
families
disgraceful.
that Senator Lewis is talking
Well,
about?
there's no question. Marijuana is not the answer to the opioid epidemic. There's several things that we can do to fight that battle. But I do think that you need to understand that there is data that says that there's a little less opioid use for those who are prescribed opioids if they use medical marijuana.
Where are you on the gateway issues, and the rest of you?
My
Yes.
experience that many of the people that I've worked, hundreds of patients across the state of Oregon, and many of them have used marijuana as a bridge to recovery, not only from opioids, but from alcohol as well. And I mean, I'm encouraged by that every single day. Anybody who can get off any of these, I think it's wonderful.
Again, Jim, we have a medical program. This ballot question is not about medical marijuana. That already is legalized in Massachusetts.
Did you want to say something about this?
Well, no, I think Kevin's right on that in terms of the gateway, but it's exactly right. This is not about medical marijuana, and the reason the proponents keep going back to it is because it's true, medical marijuana, when you ask somebody, should somebody, with 6 months to live or sick and dying get access to anything, let alone marijuana, everyone, myself included, would say yes. If somebody is in that dire situation, give them whatever helps them. This is not about that. This is about mass commercialization and advertising, and it's also not even about these joints that baby boomers sort of remember. It's not even only about the edibles. It's about, I'd love to hear more of the experience that Andrew's had about these 98% potent THC waxes that are legal, these oils. And look, I think Andrew and the governor, they have a hell of a job. I mean, the governor was opposed to this. I mean, even in a recent debate, he said the whole thing was reckless. He had to later kind of correct himself.
I've heard him say recently, we're going to have Andrew say it, that he's moved dramatically from that
and I
position.
think that lately when he's asked for it, because it's under his watch, and I understand in government, that's important to do, defending your legacy. I sympathize with him about why he might say that.
Can I ask you a question here before we find out what the governor actually says himself, since the governor's person is here? You said let's not talk about medical marijuana, then you talked about medical marijuana. You mentioned if you're sick, if you're close to death, I understand you do what you got to do. What if you're not close to death, since you brought it up? Do you support medical marijuana for people? If a doctor in his or her relationship with a patient says, I think the best thing for you is marijuana, do you support that?
If there's a prescribable medication, but if it's a 21-year-old with a backache that finds some doctor who's doing this on Skype, which is what is happening, and goes into a pot shop and says, ooh, my back hurts, I mean, I think that's a farce.
So the state should get in between the doctor and
No,
the patient.
I think, no, the science should lead with this, and we need to have more research. That's why we've pushed for more CBD research and more other research, but it's important to separate these issues. I was simply bridging because you had brought up the issue.
Andrew, if I can just for a second, Governor Hickenlooper, he did say reckless early on.
Yep.
I think he moved to risky from reckless. Where is he now, and why is he where he is now?
So I think what you probably hear afterwards is the fact that he's been surprised that the short-term consequences have not been, I think, the things that he worried about. And he really did not want to be the first state to do something, especially while it remained a felony on the federal level, to try to go down this road. He's been cautiously optimistic that there are 80% fewer filings for marijuana-related crimes in Colorado. There does seem to be a criminal justice aspect to this. And I think he would say that is the greatest bright spot. And he would say that if it continues in this trajectory, then it's something that should be a national conversation. He would say, however, these are 10-year questions and not 2-year questions. And so public health consequences of what happens to youth cannot be answered in 2 years. The idea of whether or not it's a complement or a supplement for prescription drugs, alcohol, tobacco, That's going to take 10 years to figure out.
Madeline, did you ever hand up for 1 second? Did you want to say something or did you not?
No,
Okay,
I
fine.
actually-
Jason Lewis, yeah, we'll get to you.
Governor Hickenlooper say back in June, his advice to other states is go slow. Wait, learn from Colorado. And I think that's terrific advice. That's what we should
I
do.
want to get to the go
Continue
slow
to
thing in a
learn.
second. Can we talk about race for a minute and how much this matters? The mayor in this city, as you know, is a powerful opponent of this question. He said he's willing, Mayor Walsh said he's willing to campaign for it. Two city councilors of color, Tito Jackson and Michelle Wu, who's the chair of the city, the president of the city council, excuse me, the other day came out in favor. Here's what she said. This is Michelle Wu. It just seems ridiculous that kids at Harvard can smoke pot and have incredibly successful careers, while blacks and Latinos, particularly men and boys who are using the same substance, are sent to jail. Let me just finish if I can. A year after,
not the case.
if I may, you can respond in a second. A year after decriminalization, a black person in Massachusetts, a black person was 3.9 times more likely to be arrested than a white person, even though the federal research shows that the usage is comparable. You want to speak to that, Senator?
This is a myth that is just not true. The Special Senate Committee dug into all the data on any arrests, never mind convictions, for marijuana possession or use, and it is in the single digits in Massachusetts. We have the lowest rate of any state. We have, remember, decriminalized since 2008, which means up to an ounce. By the way, an ounce of marijuana is like 50 joints. It's not a small amount. Up to an ounce, you can possess. The worst thing that'll happen to you is you can get a civil ticket, and the police don't even bother to do that. We are not arresting people today in Massachusetts for simple possession. If you're trafficking large quantities, or if you perhaps get arrested for assault or battery or breaking and entering, the DA might add on a possession charge if you had more than an ounce.
So you don't think there's any racially discriminatory aspect?
You know what I do worry about, Jim?
You do or
is
you don't?
the industry, once they take root, they will be targeting poor and minority neighborhoods.
You do or you don't see a racial...
I do not see that today as a major... I see a major criminal justice issue we have in our state. We need to reform our mandatory minimum laws. We need to reform our bail laws. There is absolutely a racial justice component to that, but that's not a marijuana issue.
Does race play out at all in your work?
Nationwide, I think if you look at that data, I mean, I think that I've seen Jason's data, and I think they did a great job with that 118-page report. You should take it out and take a deep dive. But I think overall, when you look at the various experiences around the country, there seems to be more than one study that suggests that there is a racial factor.
But we're not debating other states. We're debating Massachusetts, right? It's a Massachusetts-specific ballot
We're
question.
debating other states if Colorado works, and we're not debating other states.
Well, if there's racial disparities in arrests in Mississippi, that's not a reason for us to commercialize marijuana in Massachusetts. That's
Madeline, you had your hand
There's
up.
racial disparities in this criminal justice system across the nation. And as a person of color, I'm very concerned about my 6 grandchildren driving while brown and getting pulled over. And if they happen to have a joint on them, they can lose their scholarships to go to college. They can lose their livelihood. They can lose so much. And I think that Michelle Alexander had it correct. It's the new Jim Crow.
Kevin.
Jim, we have a race problem. We have a race problem in this country. I don't think we're in denial. We have a problem with community relations. We have a problem with police practices. We have a criminal justice problem that incarcerates more people in the world than 5 times our historical average and 4 times the average in Europe. So we're not blind to the fact that there's a race problem. The idea that the legalization of marijuana can solve that, one statistic that I'm surprised Andrew didn't bring up, because I know he is trying his best under very dire circumstances with an industry that lobbies his office, not his fault, with an industry that is special interest groups that are outnumbering the anti-pot, and Andrew, we've had these discussions about how much they outnumber the anti-pot folks by 10 to 1 because it's in their interest to make money. The issue is, in Colorado, kids being arrested for pot has gone up from 2014 versus 2012. Guess where that increase was if you divide it by race? More blacks and Latino kids under 18 and fewer whites being arrested under legalization. And the Denver Post, which receives ad revenue from the pot industry, so this was a miracle to see this article, the Denver Post had an investigation. They found that there were more pot shops in Colorado in poorer neighborhoods than there were in upper class neighborhoods. There was so it's just like the alcohol. Where are the liquor stores in Massachusetts? I used to live here. Has it changed?
Nope.
Are they in the upper class communities, or are they out in the lower class communities of color and communities of poverty? That's why actually Michelle Alexander, our friend, actually was against legalization in Ohio, the person who wrote the new Jim Crow. This is bad for race relations. More black kids in Colorado arrested today.
Is he accurately reflecting
actually,
the
it's
situation?
even slightly worse than that because the raw rate of posts of over 21 that were receiving court filings before went down for everybody. So everybody, the raw rate, but the rate for minorities, particularly Hispanics and African Americans, the rate's actually worse than it was before legalization. And
How about the personal freedom issue that Madeline mentioned? Marjorie Egan and I were talking about on the radio years ago, long before this came up, and there was a caller on the phone. We were saying, does anybody in Congress actually and there have got to be some who believe we should legalize marijuana, do they have the courage? I can't think of anybody except Representative Paul. Our phone rang, and who was on the phone but Congressman Barney Frank, who said, this is totally an issue of personal freedom. If you're doing harm to me, you know the whole argument, then there's another issue. If you're not doing harm to me...
But you've taken care of that.
Let me just finish the thought, please. It's exactly what Madeline said, and Barney Frank would agree with her. It's an issue of personal freedom. How much should that matter, Kevin Hill, or is science more important than my right to do what I want to do if it doesn't hurt you?
I think personal freedom is incredibly important here, and I
Pull
think
your mic up again,
when you look at the science, again, people who are using in a significant way regular use, that's where the harm is. So if we're talking about adults, and we have to understand that in this country there are a lot of adults who use cannabis like they do alcohol. So for those people, it's really not an issue. They should be, I think, allowed to do what they want if they're not hurting other people.
Why should you tell me what to do?
So I think that's the one argument that really has merit, personal freedom. The other arguments the proponents make that's going to generate tax revenues, that this is going to get rid of the black market, that it's going to end racial disparities and rest, all of those are false arguments. I do agree in personal freedom, but again, that doesn't mean we have to commercialize it. Doesn't mean we have to create a pot industry, advertise it on TV, push high-potency edibles. Let adults have that option to have a safe, labeled product, but don't
stay with you just for a
commercialize
second.
it.
I asked you earlier, Senator Lewis, if you could draft a bill that dealt with a commercialization issue that both of you have mentioned quite a few times, and then you could support it, and you said yes. Why haven't you filed? Rather than the public going through a multi-million-dollar exercise, and despite forums like this, I said to you in the room, I've done a number of ballot questions myself. One of the unfortunate things, despite wonderful efforts by people to make the public more aware, the history of ballot campaigns, at least in this state, and I'm guessing the other 2 dozen that have them, if one side dramatically outspends the other side, the merits really don't matter. 9 times out of 10, if not more, the side with much more money is going to... So rather than even letting it go to the ballot, and I've been involved in situations where legislators pass something and we pulled a ballot question, why haven't you drafted a question that deals with your commercialization concern? Go to the proponents and say, I know it's not exactly what you want, but it addresses my major concern. Let's make a deal, and we can legalize it here and keep constraints, regulate it, all these sort. Why haven't you done that?
Well, I think we are working on that, which is again why we created 18 months ago a special Senate committee, why we're having these conversations. But we cannot do that now with the threat of this bad ballot question hanging over us. And we need to first deal with that. We need to, I believe, vote no. And then let's all sit down around the table with all the stakeholders. When this ballot question was written, the industry and some pot activists wrote it. Who should be at the table? Law enforcement, health providers, municipal officials. They should all be at the table.
Kevin, yeah.
You're forgetting a primary point here. I hate to say it. The industry doesn't care if you wrote something that is about home grow and non-commercialization. This is about making money. They will stop at nothing at making money. You have decriminalized in Massachusetts. I agree with Kevin and the others, and I think Madeline and I would agree. Personal freedom is very important. You have decriminalized marijuana here. Can you decriminalize it maybe better and tinker with it? Sure, in the legislature, that's a good question. We should tinker with it. The industry doesn't make money, though, when my parents smoke a joint, and Mom, I didn't out you. You don't actually smoke a joint. But if they did, once a month, that's not where they make money. They make money from marketing these edibles and other things to young people. That doesn't happen under decrim. You don't have pot gummy bears in Massachusetts yet because you already have decriminalization. So you could come up with, and God bless the legislature and the governor could work on this forever and spend a lot of taxpayer money. It wouldn't matter. You'd still have this ballot initiative because folks need to make money.
But as
They
you
s-
know, the
they see
law with
Massachusetts.
ballot initiatives, unless the constitutional amendment, he and 199 of his colleagues have the ability to amend it, to repeal it. I've done ballot questions that have been repealed an hour after, not an hour, a few days after the public endorsed them. They can amend them and the governor can sign them. So is your contention, I know you're not, well, you used to be from here. Is your contention that essentially they're so owned
No,
by
my
the
contention,
industry that
no,
they can't?
No, my contention is that the industry would simply just come back and do the amendment. They're pouring millions of dollars from Washington, D.C. right here in Massachusetts, that money, in order to pass this. So this is about money for them. It's
Speaking of money, can we talk about money for a second? Originally, I heard you're raising a ton of dough. And then I heard you're raising a ton of dough, but it barely covers the cost of administering the implementation of this law.
Yeah.
So settle it. Where
So
are
I,
things?
I
and
am
what's
a
the
huge wet
projection?
blanket when it comes to taxes.
You are a wet blanket.
Yeah. And
Well, then
and-
let's move on. if
No,
we
yeah,
can.
here you go.
Get
So
it.
we,
I'm going to add
so
a wetter blanket, though, Jim.
Go ahead.
from taxes from medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, and fees, we've gotten $135 million last fiscal year, and that sounds like a lot of
How
money.
many people in your state? Roughly the same as ours? 6 million?
Yeah. So
Okay, roughly
it's
the
a
same size.
$27 billion budget in Colorado.
Ours is 40,
And I
okay.
think what is probably the most pernicious thing about the tax revenue is that people think it can do a lot more than it can do. And so my job before this was actually trying to raise everybody's income tax to go to education reform. It was going at the exact same time as marijuana legalization was going. And we got back in the polling, we'll just tax marijuana. I do want to say it is not enough money to significantly change education, to significantly change transportation, healthcare costs. It's money that marijuana will pay for its own regulatory stuff, and that's about a fourth of the money.
And let me
then
just
we
be
pay
clear
for-
before Senator Lewis weighs in. Is your contention as the person who's sort of in charge there that even once the infrastructure is firmly in place, it's still not going to be it's basically going to cover its own cost of implementation?
It does more than cover its own cost. We have $100 million of money that we can spend. We put $40 million into school construction right now. We pay for youth programming. We pay for substance
With the current
abuse.
tax?
With the current tax
You mean
money.
it's just not some bonanza like it was projected?
It's that when $40 million goes into school construction, people think that they're going to get a new gym in their backyard, and that covers like 10 new roofs being redone.
how many
and
new
so,
schools have been constructed?
and so I do try to say you have to keep a sense of scale with this money. It's not that it's trivial amounts of money. It's that compared to a $27 billion budget, you're not going to see the sort of differences that I think people have.
Well, thank God we don't need $40 million here, by the way. Yeah.
And Jim, I wish we could get 100 or even 130, 150 million dollars in Massachusetts because we desperately need it to fix the T. We desperately need it for better mental health and substance abuse treatment. But the fact is, we won't see anything near that in Massachusetts for two reasons. First, the tax rate in this ballot question is so irresponsibly low. It's about a third of what the total rate is in Colorado when you add in state and local taxes. So we will see nothing close. And number two, that number in Colorado includes taxes on medical marijuana as well. And we don't tax medical in Massachusetts, and I don't think we're going to change
So
that.
if it
So
passed,
two
I
big
know you hate
reasons
to
why we
deal with
wouldn't see
hypotheticals.
anything close to that money in
Senator, I know you
Massachusetts.
hate to deal with hypotheticals. Should this thing pass, despite your opposition, would you propose raising the tax?
Well, I'm a liberal Democrat. I don't have a problem raising taxes, but we have, we have a Republican governor who has pledged not to raise taxes and fees in Massachusetts. So I don't see how we would overcome that. It would be a major challenge, as it would be to fix any of the problems in this ballot question. Nobody should be under the illusion that pass this warts and all, and the legislature and the governor will fix it. That's wishful thinking.
Yes, Kevin.
You have an alcohol tax in Massachusetts. Do you have alcohol treatment on demand? You have a tobacco tax. Does everybody addicted to tobacco get treatment on demand? And the last time I checked, when I lived here, there was a lottery. School's #1 in the country yet?
Well,
How
they
many
actually are
new
number-
schools?
They actually are number
but
one
from
in
the
the
lottery?
country.
From the lottery?
Well, they get a billion.
I mean,
cities and
the
towns
issue
get
is
a billion.
but how many new
I hate the
schools-
lottery.
Yeah.
Cities and towns get $1 billion a year from the lottery, and we do have the #1 rated
But
schools
how many
and test scores
schools
in the country.
But how many schools have been constructed either for
don't know.
marijuana in Colorado or from the lottery in the state?
I do think that this does not fall into anything different than what it normally is, which is that sin taxes and that's
right.
what you would consider this can't be a structural part of your.
You know,
of your-
But they
by the
will
way,
be
it's much
even
more
less.
romantic
They'll
now,
be
I
even-
should say.
Just
What?
to be clear, Jim,
Yeah.
they'll be way, way less than what we do get from cigarette taxes or from the lottery. So even again,
We're not
they're
allowed
not,
to talk about
they're not
cigarette
apples to
taxes
apples,
as
right?
lottery. You're the one who told me that. So since you violated your own prescription, why should we tax cigarettes, alcohol, the lottery, which is arguably the most regressive tax of them all. It's like Robin Hood in reverse. But we shouldn't legalize and tax marijuana, even if it only means $40 million additional only for school roofs, 10 school roofs. Why shouldn't we?
All I'm saying is that the proponents make the argument that we should legalize and tax it because we're going to have this windfall of tax revenue to take care of problems with the tea in our schools, and that's just not going to happen. It's just
Don't you have a
that's
ton of
lie.
priorities that you could use $40 million for?
I'll tell you where the $40 million will go, Jim. The new Cannabis Control Commission, the new Cannabis Advisory Board, millions of dollars to the Department of Safety to do training for our police
Andrew
officers.
said that was after the
millions of dollars to
infrastructure.
the Department of Public Health, who now has to do a public health campaign. Millions of dollars to the Department of Agriculture, who now has the job to regulate pesticides because the EPA won't do it because this is illegal under federal law. $40 million will be gone. Poof.
And there's another issue here. What about, there's the issue about why wouldn't the taxes matter? What about the costs? I mean, you could talk about the money. What about the cost to our roadways? Look at the drug to driving issue in Colorado and Washington State. AAA just did their study, and in AAA, and you can, you know, if you trust them to tow your car at 3 in the morning, I also trust them to do a pretty unbiased studies, found that in Washington State, drug driving crashes among recent marijuana users, not those who smoked a month ago, doubled after legalization. Colorado has seen an increase in fatal car crashes among those with recent marijuana use. So what are the costs that
Andrew's
come
making
with...
it okay, let's hold on to just that
costs?
one.
You
since
can't just
it's-
talk about the benefits.
We have no idea what's going on with drug driving.
So where
And
does that come
that's
from,
because-
Kevin? If they have no idea and he's the czar, where does that fact come
It
from?
comes from the Colorado, wait, it comes from the Department of Transportation. So we have statistics. I mean, I'm not pulling these out of the
So 2 years ago, we
air.
made a completely new driving while high rule, and then we spent $2 million training officers in what to do it. We don't have statistics that aren't widely new. What we have is new baseline. We don't have a prior to legalization and post legalization what the world looks
The
like.
Transportation Department does, and in Colorado, it's gone
No,
up
that is
since
my
2009.
transportation
The
department.
federal
That-
Department Transportation
I think we're
Department.
I
missing
think
the
you
issue
should
on
be the
drug-
marijuana czar
Jim,
of
no, thank you.
Colorado.
I think we're, I think, sorry, but I think we're missing the issue on
What
drug
is it?
driving. We can argue over whether it increased or not. The real issue is we have nothing equivalent to a breathalyzer test that is on the market today, so there's no way for our police officers to identify someone when they pull them over. And number two, we have no legal standard that can be held up in a court of law like we do, you know, the .08 for alcohol. That doesn't exist scientifically with a sound basis for marijuana today. We need to figure that out first.
Kevin, I want to get to the point that was raised about Governor Hickenlooper saying, and you said, Andrew, a few minutes ago, 2 years is not enough, 10 years is what you need, and whether or not we need to wait. And the flip side, are there other science, I mean, you brought up that word at the beginning, are there other science issues that I'm ignoring tonight that you think are central to this debate?
I don't. I mean, I do think it's early to look at the evidence. I think that some of the medical marijuana evidence is relevant here. For example, when people talk about youth access and the concerns there, I think it's definitely a concern, but the same people who would say that legalized recreational marijuana would increase youth access probably would have said that medical marijuana would do that, and it
happened?
clearly does not.
Does not.
It does not. So marijuana use is up everywhere, but when you compare the medical marijuana states to the non-medical marijuana states, there's no change
How do you
there.
respond to that, Senator? You're the one that's primarily concerned about
Comparing
kids' access.
apples to oranges,
Why?
Jim. Apples to oranges. Medical marijuana dispensaries, we have 7 of them. In Colorado, there's more than 700 pot shops, more than Starbucks and McDonald's combined. Medical marijuana dispensaries are not advertising on TV, radio. They don't have billboards. They're not all over social media. They're not it's not commercializing. It's nonprofit. They are nonprofit. It's a completely different model
we did
in
see-
Massachusetts, and that's exactly
other
why we're
reason
not seeing
on
that
the
impact.
Wait,
Our
Andrew was going to
public
speak, then I'll
health
get to
survey,
you.
so we do have a much more robust medical model, and our public health surveys also did not have it show up within the public health service. I will tell you what did happen was that suspension rates did go up that were drug related. So we don't pull out specifically for medical, but in 2009 we did see a bump, which was when we commercialized medical marijuana. We did see a bump in high school suspension rates. We didn't see it show up in our public health survey, and so there's a little bit of tension there between.
Are you
those
texting me so you
No,
can
I'm,
speak?
look,
You
I'm
can
getting
just
the
tell-
I'm getting
sorry,
the
go
drug driving rate
Yeah,
because the
sure.
Obama administration actually funded the part of the study, which is interesting given their position. So I want to look at those driving stats again and talk about them. But the issue about medical marijuana is interesting. Is that when you look within the states that have the more liberal medical marijuana laws that resemble legalization, like Andrew just said, you see the increase. When you look at studies though that look at 25 different states that are all completely different programs. I mean, Maine's medical marijuana program can't be the equivalent of California's or Nevada's, right? They're all different. Yes, when you mix and mash up all of those together in some of these studies, you say, oh my gosh, we see no difference before and after. But when you look at the individual states that are the states that we're looking to model after Massachusetts, you see the problems. I think that's a very important academic distinction there.
Can we stay with Barack Obama for a second? There was a tweet that was sent to Marjorie Egan today, but she doesn't read them that regularly. I read them to her. It said, essentially, to her and me, but primarily to Marjorie, since she's been open about her support for this, how can you support a drug that the federal government classifies exactly as it classifies heroin? Yeah. Explain to me why in 2016, even if it turns out that some of you think this legalization is a bad idea, why is it still a Schedule 1
Because
drug?
it's a complete misunderstanding of what
She didn't say it.
No, I'm just because it's a complete misunderstanding of what scheduling is. It doesn't mean that, and I'm not saying, I don't think anybody is, that marijuana is heroin. That's not what that means. It means that they're classified under a certain way the government's tended to classify. Similar to if there was a snack food aisle, and in the snack food aisle there was Ruffles potato chips and an apple. You don't say that, oh my gosh, we're now saying that the apple and the Ruffles potato chips are the exact same thing. That's ridiculous. One is more greasy, one's a fruit, one's good for you, one's bad for you. Of course that would be ridiculous to say. But in that aisle that grocer labeled as snack food, they're both in aisle 3. That's the issue of marijuana as a Schedule 1. It means that they both, under that definition of no accepted medical use. The FDA, the AMA, no major medical association has said that smoking the leaves of marijuana, the flowering tops, is a medicine. They have said there are pills, there are other things, and that's why those aren't Schedule 1.
No accepted medical use. Yeah.
Well, I published a paper in JAMA that says otherwise. So I think when we talk about scheduling, I do the research with marijuana. I use cannabinoids in our clinical trials, and I really believe that it should not be Schedule 1. I mean, when you talk about it, is it addictive? Yes. Does it have medical value? I think when you look at the totality of the evidence, you can understand that there is some medical value. Obviously, as Kevin said, we need more research there, but the research is clearly impeded by that Schedule 1 status.
It's not just aisle 3. It's, hey, and specifically down aisle 3, scientists can't go down that aisle.
There are hundreds. There are hundreds of scientists that are researching marijuana.
Wait a second.
I did this at the federal government.
Because,
but this was my job.
Wait. No, I know you think it's not relevant.
This was my job.
No, it is.
Jim,
I
this
didn't say it
was
wasn't
my job at
relevant.
the federal government.
Kevin, you're going to respond.
This was my job at the federal government to review the research petitions rather than some of the stuff in Colorado. And what we saw was that there was over 300 researchers. Actually, there should be, by the way, more research. We're all in agreement. But there were hundreds and are currently hundreds of researchers. Are they impeded by some of the Schedule 1 restrictions? Yes. And that's why the DEA has said last month, we want to have more sites that grow marijuana. We want to do more research on CBD.
But they didn't reclassify it last month.
But that's a different issue. The reclassifying is almost a red herring. The more difficult part of it isn't reclassifying. Anybody could do that. The more difficult part of it was, what are the certain things that need to be increased in order to facilitate the research? And that is what we looked at when I was working for President Obama. That is what the FDA and the DEA are currently looking at. Are there some impediments? Yes. Dr. Hill, I respect, but many, obviously, of the colleagues at Harvard and others completely disagree with your assessment. They not only disagreed with your op-ed in the Boston Globe, they disagree with your assessment about scheduling, and the FDA was the one who told the DEA. It was not the DEA that said it. The FDA did an 8-factor analysis, and they said, you know what, because marijuana is grown in so many different ways, because there are so many different kinds, we can't reclassify it. What we can do is do more research on the components. And Kevin and I would agree that the components of marijuana show promise. The natural plant shows promise too.
Want to respond to that,
we should
Kevin?
do more
The
research.
components are Schedule 1 too. So cannabidiol, which Kevin would say has a lot of promise, and I totally agree, that's Schedule 1. So it's hard to do that research too. So when you talk about that, you have to understand that the components are also difficult to study.
But that question was marijuana.
Because of the
not should
scheduling issue.
The question was, should
mentioned Barack
marijuana
Obama.
be rescheduled, not
You
the
mentioned
components.
Barack Obama. A question that we ordinarily get when we're talking about this on the radio is a pretty successful guy not only used marijuana, but he used cocaine.
Yeah.
And he turned out relatively well, I think.
That's right.
58% of the people think he's doing a pretty good job. What do you say to a kid or an adult who's listening to this debate when Barack Obama at least experimented and then
Oh.
some. He wrote it himself, for those who don't know. What do you say to that?
And many other smart people have used, not just Barack Obama, have used marijuana and, frankly, other drugs.
Charlie Baker,
and have
Maura
been
Healey,
no, I didn't
both
say
of
that.
whom opposed
Well,
the question,
all right.
I should say, but they
although
do.
it's interesting, both presidential candidates for the first time in 20 years have both said they have not used marijuana, which is interesting.
First time they've ever lied. It's unbelievable.
Well, I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right.
Well,
No,
I'm
but the
kidding,
answer
but-
is this. A lot of successful people have. And I agree with Kevin again. We seem to be agreeing a lot. Most people who use marijuana will not have the problems. Frankly, most people who try any drug will not go on to be addicted. The issue is that risk goes up for your problem. So it's the same thing of smoking and lung cancer, Jim. Most people who smoke regularly do not get lung cancer. Most people who, if you went home and drove home without a seatbelt, your chances of dying in a car crash go up. You're not guaranteed to die in a car crash. The same thing with helmets, the same thing with sugary foods, the same thing with a lot of things. Our point isn't that, oh my God, if you use marijuana, you're going to be, you try it once, you're definitely going to fail at life. The risk goes up for dropping out of school. The risk goes up for an IQ loss. The risk goes up for truancy. The risk goes up for absenteeism. Just like when you smoke, the risk goes up, not guaranteed. I know. My neighbor smoked cigarettes for 80 years. He died of old age. That's
Andrew
the
wants
issue.
to speak to this.
I think that there's an important point there that I hope that those listening don't miss here, which is that the youth prevention campaign has to look different than they've looked in the past. It turns out, as somebody who's tried to run a few of these youth prevention campaigns, kids don't trust the way that we talk to them about marijuana anymore. They don't trust, and they haven't trusted it because I think we've overstated it for a very long time, and that puts us in a bad place. But the good news is that even as perception of risk is going down in many, many states, youth consumption is not going up. And I do think they'll listen to a conversation that says, hey, you have immediate goals in your future. You want to get a driver's license. You want to go do well on your test. You want to go get a girlfriend. That one I liked the most. You want to make a sports team, which I didn't like as much. And is marijuana part of that picture for you? And I actually think that there are better ways of having conversations with kids right now than just trying to pretend that marijuana doesn't exist, and then if it exists, it's going to be doing a lot of negative harm to yourself.
Madeline
That's a conversation.
Before, Senator, Madeline, you wanted to say something about that, and then we'll get to
I
the
think
Senator.
we're all singing Kumbaya. We agree. I mean, we absolutely have to talk to our kids differently about it. And this is a big issue today without even legalizing for commercial use. And, the reality is, notwithstanding the best intentions of Andrew and everyone in Colorado, the first campaign they rolled out from the Department of Public Health failed miserably. Because we have to, that's the challenge here. We have to learn. So again, my argument would be, let's learn from Colorado. Let's let them figure out the best way to talk to teens and a campaign that's very successful, because these campaigns cost millions and millions of dollars, and then let's implement it here.
Let me do a variation, if I can, on what you and I have been talking about let's do something that, well, the discussion we've been having. Seth Moulton, the Congressman Moulton, was one of the few public officials with whom we've spoken who actually says he's voting yes on this thing, a new congressperson from the North Shore. There are legitimate concerns, he told us, from the other side, but there's the reality. Let's not kid ourselves. People are using marijuana, kids are using marijuana, and we have an obligation to regulate it and make it as safe as possible. I call this the train has left the station notion. I want to start with you in a second. 54, I think, to 41, you may correct me, I have a feeling, is the most recent poll I've seen nationally. Let me finish. Millennials, overwhelmingly, and that's generally what happens with major change in society, whether it's gay marriage or marijuana, young people are much more open-minded and tolerant. They're going to grow older. They're going to become more of the population. The train is leaving the station, isn't it? And let's assume you prevail in this round come November 8th. I assume you would agree that you won't prevail 4 years later or 4 years later. Ultimately, I guess this is a question, we're going to have legalized recreational marijuana in Massachusetts. Would you not agree?
That's maybe, I don't know. That's hypothetical. But at the same time that Congressman Moulton came out and said that, what you didn't mention is at the same time, Congressmen Kennedy, Tsongas, Lynch, and Keating all came out and said,
The vast
four is
majority.
bad for
I mentioned the
Massachusetts.
governor's
So,
against it, the
I know,
mayor's
but
against it,
if
the
we're going to
attorney
cherry
general's-
pick one, we should mention the others. And again, what I find is when I talk to groups, and I've been doing this now for about 6 months since I did take a public position, almost every single time people say, wow, I didn't know that's what this was about. I thought, what's the big deal? If an adult wants to smoke a joint, they're here, what's the big deal? As soon as they learn what this ballot question is really about, that this is the marijuana industry, pot shops opening up in every community, marijuana edibles being aggressively promoted, that's when they say, wow, I don't know, that's what
Kevin,
we
you
want
worry
from
about this,
Massachusetts. So
are you
I don't
as-
think anything is a foregone
He doesn't
conclusion here,
think,
Jim.
you just heard it. Is it a foregone, forget what happens on November 8th here or in these other 4 states. You don't think the battle, your battle has been lost?
Not at all. Look, in 1970s, it was the same thing. We had millennials, and obviously it's a little different now in terms of the numbers, but you had the same rate of increase, where millennials in 1970 and the late 60s were absolutely in favor of pot. I mean, it was the time of, we're seeing a lot of nodding heads here, people who were teens in the 70s. This was seen as a foregone conclusion. And then a lot of things happened that quickly reversed course. I actually take issue with the comparison. I know you were doing it in terms of politically, but others try and compare this with same-sex marriage. It is very, very, very different than an issue like same-sex marriage. No matter where you stand on same-sex marriage is not an issue of public health and public safety. If my kid is being driven in a bus by somebody in a same-sex marriage, that is, whether I find that wonderful or repugnant, that does not affect their driving. That does not affect the safety.
That is not at all what I
but
was
that's
saying.
what people, other people
excuse
say
me.
that, though.
What I was saying is the polling
I
is
understand.
very
But
comparable.
let me finish
If I
my
may-
point.
No, let me finish
Okay,
my
sure.
point so it's clear what I'm talking about.
Sure.
The polling suggests while the general public is leaning slightly in favor, as happened with gay marriage, same-sex
agree.
marriage, millennials, young people, overwhelmingly support it, and most of them are going to grow up and be older.
Let me just
people.
finish my point
Yes,
about
but
the.
of course you can.
Okay,
I just
thank
want
you.
to- I'm
I
not
appreciate it.
comparing
No, I know
the
that you weren't,
issues.
Jim. I know that you weren't.
Wait, go ahead.
So what I'm saying is, though, the issue why that analogy of the bus driver matters is because millennials are going to start to have children, and this has a public health and safety impact. Their attitudes when they have kids are not your attitude when you're a sophomore at BU. Your attitudes about marijuana change because this is public health. Edibles and driving while stoned are a public health and
54 to
safety
41
issue.
nationally, Kevin,
I think
are
that'll
adults.
change.
No, but
Right.
54 to
Right. You gotta
41
ask
is
about
not,
millennials.
excuse me, are not millennials. 54 to 41 is the most recent poll I've seen, I think in July,
You're right.
of all people across
That's
the United
right.
States. Wait, but some of them are adults with children. Most of them are adults with children.
Yeah.
I assume they're smart enough to figure out what the
Jim,
consequences
that's
are.
not
The
the
increase
polling
is
in
driven by
Massachusetts
millennials.
right now. It's much closer here, right? And also, I think, again, what people are learning is that the details matter. This isn't just conceptually should we legalize. The details matter. You know, Governor Peter Shumlin in Vermont, a strong proponent of legalization, trying hard to push through a bill in his state, came out and said this ballot question is a bad pot bill. Those are his words, bad pot bill. So the details matter in public policy. You know, people's health and safety matters. We need to do this right.
That's
This is
why I
not the way to
suggested
do
you
it.
should consider drafting a better one, by the way.
I think that's a
Consider-
great point, and
Yeah.
I hope it isn't lost.
We are.
Wait, say that again, please, Andrew.
I think that's a great point, and I hope it's not lost. Saying this is not a generic Democrat and a generic Republican.
Oh,
This
of course
is
it's not.
how really does matter, and I do, and Senator Lewis and I now have a 2-year relationship. It's one of the longest relationships in my life, and and he really does. He thinks very hard about how in this one, and he's not a knee-jerk reaction. Just no. And so I would throw. He's genuinely searching for deep answers here.
You know, I actually subscribe to the train is leaving the station, despite what you're saying. However, you mentioned a bit ago, and I think you may have touched on this too, the flip side of that is even if the train has left the station, and you said this too, maybe it should be slowed down. Do we have enough evidence? I want to go through the whole list here. Do we have enough evidence to make an informed decision in your estimate? I know we make a lot of uninformed decisions in this country. Do you think the people of Massachusetts and California and Maine and whatever the other 2 states are, do they know enough based upon the experience you've had and DC and the other Alaska, and I can't remember what the last one is. Do we know enough to make an informed decision?
No, but you'll never know enough. And so there's the question is, I want it to be the right question. It should be a question about criminal justice and the values of regulation versus the evils of possible commercialization and availability and what that will do towards abuse and youth use. To me, that's the crux of the entire argument. Some of these things are just going to be ongoing. I mean, the criminal justice aspect of it will continue to exist for the extent to which you don't do something. And so you're never going to have the perfect amount of information. Now, I think we have much better information 10 years than we do, and it's significantly better information 8 years from now than we have right now.
You know, I want to get back to for a second to use the word regulate a minute ago, which I meant to mention earlier. I couldn't read my writing, so I didn't get to it. You lived in Cambridge. You lived in Cambridge. I live in Cambridge. We have a great high school, Cambridge Rindge and Latin. As much as I love it, I have driven past more than once to see a kid who isn't 21 years old either grabbing a joint from a friend or handing a joint to a friend. I want to start there and then come down this line. Regardless of the strength of your position, if you're against this thing, it's currently unregulated. That kid has absolutely no idea what he or she is getting, can't possibly know. If this were to become law, as imperfect as you consider it to be, Senator, there would be regulation. We would know what the content was. Is that not a hugely important factor, particularly vis-a-vis children?
Not if you look at the practical reality.
What does that mean?
Because this is still illegal for those under 21. There's still a thriving underground market
But
in
they're
legal
smoking. As
legal
Seth Moulton
states.
said, they're smoking.
But wait a minute, yeah, they are. But there's still going to be in Colorado, even in the legal market. Last year, they had over 60 recalls because of pesticides and banned sort of substances that were in the supposedly regulated marijuana. And there's still a black market selling illegal marijuana to kids who don't have a fake ID.
So regulation
and so that's
would
not going to go away.
Regulation would not make it safer for kids.
No, not absolutely.
Would it make
not.
it safer for kids?
Not really, on balance. I suppose if they got it from, someone went in a store and bought it for them, maybe that product is a little safer. Again, we have problems with testing right now, detecting the pesticides.
Why would it be a little?
potency.
Why would
maybe.
it be night
But
and day? Why
to
would it,
what Kevin
why is
said,
it not better to know that a government-appointed commission decide? Let me just finish the thought, please. How it was regulated, so that there's some ability to know what you're taking. How is that just a little?
Because that is a benefit for those who are purchasing the product, I agree, in the legal market. But the fact is, the black market is alive, or the illegal market, I should say, is alive and well and thriving in Colorado. And with the very permissive home growing written into this ballot question, people can grow up to 12 plants. That's tens of thousands of dollars. It's going to be everywhere. So kids are still going to be getting it essentially through the illegal
Madeline,
market.
you wanted to speak to that?
Well, I wanted to say that we failed our children in this country by lying to them about marijuana and saying that it's equivalent or on the same, well, having it on the same schedule as heroin. And then kids go out there and they smoke marijuana and they realize this can't be heroin. This is very nice. I'm euphoric. And who doesn't want to be euphoric? And I think that we need to start being honest with our children. I've been smoking. The train left the station a long time ago with me. Since I was 16, I worked in a women's prison. And as I walked down the halls in a maximum security prison, I could smell marijuana wafting down the halls. If we can't keep it out of prison, we can't keep it away from our kids. And we stand a better chance of having a regulated market where you ask for ID. Drug dealers don't ask for ID, and they don't just sell marijuana.
What's the value of regulation?
So I do think 80-20 is a positive for the health of the product itself, meaning there are really bad pesticides being sprayed on marijuana, some of them which cleave off hydrogen cyanide we've discovered, and we are able to shut that kind of stuff down. We're also able to create edibles that are homogeneously placed with THC. They have only 10 milligrams of THC rather than 80 milligrams of THC. It is overall a public health, public safety thing. And I would say for the internal black market, and this is a much too big conversation, we are shutting down the internal black market. There is evidence of many fewer drug dealers. And so overall, there is a positive towards what ends up in kids' hands. Now, what I will say is the other side of it is there are now more and more potent products, and there are innovations in the marijuana world which probably wouldn't be as available to kids, such as shatter, that are worse for kids in that way. And so it's a complicated answer.
How about the regulation issue, Kevin?
I agree with Andrew. I think that good policy should make it somewhat safer. But I also want to mention the black market piece. In Massachusetts right now, we're talking probably 95% of the cannabis that's purchased is black market cannabis. So if you were to vote this in, and then you have regulated cannabis available, you're going to dramatically curb, although not eliminate, the black market. And I do think that's a step towards improved safety.
You know, in all these kinds of debates, as someone who used to, as I said, do ballot questions for a living, the thing that drove me nuts were the myths that grew up around certain campaigns that became fact, not really fact, but became de facto fact, for lack of a better expression. Anybody want to speak to you what you think the most, regardless of your position, what the most dangerous myth in this debate, I don't mean just here, but in any of these states has been that needs to be exploded? Anybody? Is there something that drives you as nuts as I used to be driven nuts? Any of you, Senator?
Well, the three we've talked about, that this is all about, reducing arrests and keeping people out of jail. It's not. We've already decriminalized. Second, there's all this revenue we're going to be bringing in to solve our budget woes. That's fool's gold. That will not. And then third, what we've just been talking about here, which is this will clean up the illegal market. The fact is, Colorado, it's thriving. When I talk to law enforcement out there, they said there are gangs and cartels that are relocating to Colorado because now they manufacture the product there, and then they smuggle it across state lines. Remember, still illegal under federal law, so there's this huge profit motive to now smuggle to other states.
Andrew, what's the story on that?
Yeah, I would spend the entire time talking about our loose home grow laws and say that's the single biggest mistake Colorado has made. It's not our licensees who do literally track every marijuana plant with a radio frequency identifier tag from seed to sale. It's our very loose home grow laws that have created an incentive to grow inside Colorado and ship to other states.
And it would be more permissive here under this ballot,
So I
even
kind
than
of
it
hope
is
you
in
guys pass
Colorado.
that then. So then, because having the loosest in the nation really does attract people there.
Is there a myth, as the science man here, that troubles you the most?
Well, I think when you talk about this particular ballot question, I think both sides tend to distort the black market piece, right? I think the pro-marijuana people will say that, hey, you're going to eliminate the black market. You're not going to do that. But as I did point out, Jason's saying that it's thriving in Colorado. You're definitely going to put a dent in it here. So I think it is a step towards bringing it into the light.
And I do want to say just one more time,
Sure.
Internally to Colorado, this has been a bite out of the black market, a very significant one.
Has been.
Yes. It is the out-of-state diversion that we have seen.
I would agree with that, Jim. If this was made legal at the federal level, then you would clean this up nationwide, right? Then you'd have the same problem you have with cigarettes. It's a very small black market, but it's not. Because it's illegal under federal law, you create this incentive to smuggle
Madeline,
across
is there a
state
myth
lines.
that, particularly in your neck of the woods out there, that's most
Well, I think the
troubling
myth
you?
is that prohibition has stopped the use of marijuana. And what it's done is it's empowered cartels and the black market. When you create a medical marijuana program and you have people a card and they pay for it, and you have nowhere for them to go to get that marijuana or any facilities, to afford them, then of course the cartels and the black market get stronger because that's where they have to go.
How about you, Kevin?
The cartels are making their money from immigration, sex slavery, meth, and cocaine mainly. So once we're going to legalize all of those, I think we have to talk about cartels. The biggest myth in my mind would be the one that says this is about adults being allowed to smoke a few joints rather than about a small number of people making a ton of money, and that this isn't about Joe Camel. In Colorado, even though they tried to implement rules on, and the governor was sued by the pot industry because he tried to make it so that there was a restriction on magazines and advertising. And the other side won because it was a First Amendment thing. The billboards that were in Colorado, even though they weren't supposed to be.
We won that one.
Yeah, but they were still up there. There were still ones that were there. They violated the law, is my point, right? They still did the billboards. They still did the ads. Anybody going to Colorado reading a newspaper can see free samples and coupons targeting kids. The myth that this isn't about commercialization and money, I think, is the biggest myth about marijuana.
We only have a minute left. 15 seconds each. What's the single most, 15 seconds, what's the single most important message, because you've all mentioned many, that you want people to take home as they're thinking about this for the remaining 48 days in this campaign? One, what is it?
This is about pot candy and pot shops in your community, not about adults being able to smoke marijuana.
Madeline.
Prohibition does not work. It's a failed system.
Andrew.
What are you trying to accomplish, and how are you going to measure that, and what are you going to do if it doesn't go right?
Senator.
This is a ballot question that goes too far, too fast. It puts the profits of the commercial billion-dollar marijuana industry ahead of the health and safety of our children.
Dr. Hill.
Weigh the evidence.
Or
Weigh the evidence, make an educated decision.
I like that a lot. Let's thank our panelists here. Kevin Sabet, Madeline Martinez, Jason Lewis, Kevin Hill, and Andrew Friedman.
Hey, Kevin.
Thank you.
Whoa, don't go. Don't go. 1 second. I polled you at the beginning here. Is there anybody I'm not going to ask if you changed your position. Is anybody who came here with either a yes or a no have some doubt about the position they embraced when they came here? Is there anybody in that, or you're as certain as you were when you showed up? That's 1, 2, 3. Well, that's actually pretty horrible. In any case, no, it's not. It's about 10. Thank you all very much for coming. Gene is going to send you home. Kevin, thank you. Pleasure to meet you. Madeline, pleasure. Thanks. You're great. You're wonderful. Thank you. Jason, thank you so much, Kevin, as always.
I do want to know why that's
Whoa,
Yeah, I'll send you that page.
The charter school.
Thank you.